Grant Dania now.
It's Grant Dania.
The gold lady this year. Oh my God, it's Grant Dania.
And our mom, Shazzy Dania. She's really crazy.
It's all true.
It's All True, the podcast with Grant and Shazzy Denya.
I feel like we're 8 seasons in and we know how to start it now.
Yeah. You know who we saw yesterday or the other day was Uncle Dan, who made that opener. Whose voice?
Oh, how's Uncle Dan going?
Uncle Bloody Dan is going like a bloody legend.
You should have seen Sunday had a real fascination with him, and she kept going up and, didn't she? She was like putting her little hands all over him and mimicking him, and yeah, he found that very uncomfortable.
Do you reckon Uncle Dan could be like a kid's entertainer with that kind of fascination he's already getting?
No, what you really want to know is, do you think Uncle Dan could finally put your goddamn name in the opener of the show? Is that what you really want to know? That's what you really want to know.
It was my second question. But a lot of people want to know more about the guy who does the voiceover. Like, so many people say, who is this big booming voice at the start of the podcast? And I say, hey, if you listen, we do mention him here and there.
Well, he's my brother, so he's never going to be a big booming guy. He's 5'5" like me. He's a little pocket rocket, but he's a technical genius. And we were partying with him at the weekend, and he was partying as a Teletubby.
I know. I was trying to see if I could.
Which was hilarious.
You can't really
Makes
see.
Makes sense why Sunday would have loved that. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah. No, it's I thought maybe I might have been able to share the screen, but I don't know how to do that because I don't know.
Have you seen the old set of the Teletubbies? Like, it's all abandoned now. It's like this big empty paddock. Yeah, it's still like a thing, and it looks haunted. It looks absolutely terrifying.
How have you seen this?
Because instead of doing it like in CGI or in a studio, they actually had this in giant plot of land where they carved out this gigantic hole in the ground for their little house, which was not so little because it's got to be full size for their big costumes.
But what about the baby in the sky?
That baby in the sky is about 45 now.
Far out.
Yeah, I saw a picture of the
Uncle
baby in the
Dan.
sky the other day, and that baby's no longer a baby.
What?
Yeah. Oh, I'll show you.
Where have you seen all this stuff? How do you guys know all of this?
Yeah,
Why
well,
don't I
TikTok
know?
has got a lot of the rolling coverage of the abandoned set of the Teletubbies at the moment. If you go
Really?
on to Teletubby Talk, it'll all be there for you.
That's really sad.
Teletubbies son baby now. There you go. Look at that. That's the baby now.
Oh my God. What's that?
She's about 25.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's cool. I like it when you look back and you see people from, like you look at the Olsen twins, or you look at people who were babies in movies and just how much they've changed.
My favourite one is a bloke that...
Wow. Shezzy's coming in hot with a great dance today. We just drove yesterday for 12 hours.
13 hours.
13-hour drive from
Yep.
Queensland to regional New South Wales, back
Yep.
from my sister's 40th. And fair to say, both our brains are fried.
Yeah.
We're cooked.
Yeah. So we...
Was that trip with kids too?
Yes.
3 lovely, adoring, wouldn't shut up, wouldn't sit down little assholes.
Needed to go to the toilet every half an hour. I'm like, who gave you water? Who gave you water? We've just stopped. We can't do this many stops or we won't get
we
there.
We need water to survive.
Was there a peak part of the journey that really, really grinded your gears? Like a pinnacle moment where we were like, you know what, this is one to remember. This is a major road trip blow up that will not be forgotten.
When they were all crying at once, Shezzy included, that was when I was like, I was just about to get out of the car at 110 kilometers an hour and just flag down a truck and go the 100% the other direction. Just let
it
him
was
go.
pretty full on.
Just
And
leave him forever.
what about when they started throwing lollies at us?
Yeah, you'd be
yesterday?
driving along and like this missile would come from the back of the car and land on the windscreen right in front of you. It was dangerous, man.
Yeah, and the fighting, honestly,
We nearly sold a couple of the children on the black
You've only
market.
got one left, yeah.
I think that we're, not really saying what we actually are feeling.
What are we feeling?
Like, I feel like I'm being a little polite just because, I feel like I have to be a little more authentic It was extremely difficult, and I got very angry a lot, and I realised how dangerous it is for parents driving when their kids are fighting. You've got one arm back, yelling at the kids, trying to stop them from throwing twisties at each other. You know, she looked at me. She looked at me like this. And then
And that was Grant, and then there was the kids, right?
Yep, I was the worst.
she said I
offender.
was a snitch. I was like, I swear to God, I am going
Good use
to
of the word snitch.
I swear
Mind
to
you,
God,
for-
I am going to swear. And I was biting my tongue so hard. Just, they were tired. It was long.
She's going to have about 4 weeks of chiropractic work just from the amount of time she was turning around.
God. Yeah.
Yeah, it was hell,
It's
man.
hard.
So I sympathise with all parents who go on those road trips, on school holidays. It's a very common Australian pastime. I live in an enormous continent that requires a hell of a lot of Ks to get from A to B sometimes.
Yeah.
So
What about
we're
the-
with you, Australia.
What about the ads for, like, don't speed on Australian roads, save lives?
Yeah, one they should have don't travel with your children
That's what
ever,
I was
full
thinking.
stop.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah, good campaign.
Yeah.
Exactly. You know when they say like weary drivers die or whatever that sort of fatigue campaign is? Don't
Yeah.
take your kids. All of a sudden, it's a great holiday.
What about we're trying to drive and we're looking at the map, like, so my phone is, connected to the phone holder and it's got the map on it and we're following, where we're going. And Sailor just decides to airdrop random memes.
She was doing it to cars that were going past on the
She
highway.
thought it was funny.
She was sending memes to people's phones that she could pick up a signal of. She was doing it in the restaurant.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, mate, you can't. These are random strangers.
Like, and she's
At
got
least it was only memes.
Yeah, I know. Like, imagine, yeah.
just...
So that's the era we're entering now.
So then we got home and we had 6 mice in the bed with us last night.
we caught 6 mice in our bedroom alone, just
Yeah.
one room last
Yeah.
night.
Oh, that's a lot.
We've
that's
been
a lot
away
of mice.
for a week and, we caught 6.
Well, Shez got up and look, the traps were set, okay, and then they're electrified traps, which is apparently a nice humane way for them to go quickly. And you'd hear a little zap, and then one's down.
And you could smell burning mouse.
8 by the end of the morning.
But they
Holy smoke.
They only
It's an
catch,
infestation, is what that bloody is.
They only catch one at a time, so you have to empty it out. And I was so tired. And I said to Grant, "Do I really have to empty it?" And Grant's like, "Yeah, because we might catch another one." Because he's petrified of mice.
Hey, petrified's a big word. I'm a germaphobe. You have to take on board that's a difficulty. That's a learning difficulty. So you have to take that on board, okay?
What's a learning?
It's a
difficulty?
mental disorder, so leave me alone. Don't criticize me. Otherwise, that's
He got
germ
attacked.
shaming.
He got attacked
Germ-shaming.
by a mouse the other day, he reckons, and so I had to catch it.
What? Not reckoned. The fucking thing was on the bed, on me, scratching through my flesh. What do you call that?
There is honestly an episode in mice content on this podcast.
You are-
Like the amount
Oh
of
my
mice
God.
attacks.
What about?
Stop
That you've had.
downplaying the severity of it. And again, last night they were on us again.
Mate, I woke up.
I go to bed to sleep peacefully, not to be savaged.
I woke up, I emptied the rat trap, the mice traps, I put more peanut butter in, I came back half asleep, reset it, another one went zzz. Grant goes, Shez, we've caught another one, you have to empty it again. And I was like, are you kidding me? Can't you empty it?
I've
don't-
just driven 13 hours, man.
did
Like
not
that's
drive
my
the whole
contribution to family. You drove for an hour and a half. I had a little snooze. Thank you very much. Appreciated it. But I still did 11 and a half hours.
Do you know what the beautiful thing, and you guys already know this, but the beautiful thing about this podcast is that no matter where all three of us are at in our lives, whether we're happy, sad, frustrated, angry, we bring it all to this very public platform for everybody to hear
We do.
and be a part of, you know?
We do.
Let's face it, if it's not tabled here, it bottles up. And she will glass me one night. You know what I mean? And there will only
You're
be
like, where
two.
does all this frustration go? It's going to be here.
Exactly. There'll
The
only be-
witnesses.
You don't want 2 left in the podcast. That's not enough people to generate content.
Oh my God.
So I'm glad we have this space. So George can be the mediator. We can get it all out of our system, and I still have 2 functioning eyes.
It's all very normal. All
At
this
the
kind of
moment.
stuff is very normal. I've heard all of this before from you guys in previous episodes.
Yeah, that's right. It's an ongoing thing, Grant and his mice troubles. So today I got into trouble because I just put them into the kitchen bin.
Yeah, so I'm cleaning up the bench this morning.
It was midnight.
After our little treasures had absolutely destroyed the joint, and I go to scrape in a little bit of leftover cornflakes, and there's 8 mice looking up at me. It's like a fucking horror film. I jumped back and shat myself. I wasn't expecting to see these little terrors like coming back for their second revenge.
Oh, I can't believe how
Is the
scary.
outdoor bin like near the house or
No.
too
No.
far away?
I reckon it's 30 metres away.
Yeah.
Like it's a big chunk. We've
I'm
got to
not
go
going out there.
past 2 sheds.
I'm not going out there at midnight. 8 times I had to empty this trap, right?
It's also in the minuses at the moment here where we
Yeah,
live,
I'm
so
not-
it's very cold
true.
outside.
I'm
Yeah.
not doing that. I put it in the kitchen bin.
We should just kick them outside and let them freeze to death.
Oh, that's a good point. Or a designated mouse bin.
Yep. You can't be putting it in the house bin, man.
They're in the house. So what's the problem with putting the
That's
dead ones in
actually
the
a
bin?
Pretty good point.
Yeah, they're living in here. They're living.
But 8's a lot, man, for one room.
Do you know what?
What?
We've got more.
Yeah, it's
We've got more. So, you know,
Oh, gosh.
so today we've got a guest who might even be able to share some of his own
Actually, he'll sympathise with this.
mice stories because he's a farmer and you know what it's like on the land. You know, you
You're battling with the elements. You're battling
Yeah.
with plagues, drought, floods.
Yeah.
Planes dropping
finances.
subways.
Yep. Did you see that? Did you?
That was so good. I
That's
love
so
that.
funny. George is referring to something I posted today, which was a farming family, and they're out on the harvesters, and obviously a family member decides to drop lunch off to the family, and they come past in their Cessna, and they throw out like a Subway sandwich,
what?
foot-long Subway sandwich, and it comes down and hits their grandfather.
Takes him out.
And takes him out, knocks him over.
Oh my god!
It's hilarious.
Oh
So
my
good.
god!
It's a good post. Just-
Well, let's bring Warren in. Warren is he's also known as the Unbreakable Farmer, and
I like that name.
we've got sound on and
How dare you?
How
As
dare-
if I don't know these buttons inside and out. I'm a flawless operator.
well the mice could have. Oh, we've lost him.
I can actually see him on my screen, guys.
Can you?
Warren, hello, it's
Go.
George here. How are you, mate?
Go, mate. How are you?
Can you see Grant and
Hey.
Shezzy on your screen?
Hey.
Yeah, I can see them.
Hello, brother. How are you?
Yeah, good, man. How are you?
Really good to see you and hear your lovely voice. We're just going to tweak our little system.
I don't know
here
what
just,
I've done.
just to get you all sorted. Excuse us while we all get technical. We're
You
so good with this, mate.
I pressed something and I've stuffed it.
Warren, it's great to have you with us. You are known as the Unbreakable Farmer. We had the pleasure of hearing you speak
It was so good.
at a charity event not that long ago, and it was powerful. And as a boy coming from a farming family, we're fifth generation now. We've been on the land on the same farm for 113 years. Hearing you speak is something very close to our heart. And of course, Australia is very much built on the back of the farmer. You know, we can't eat without them. They give us the food that we eat either at our breakfast tables or at dinner. They are a precious resource, and they do a very grueling and difficult amount of work. And you have been a farmer. You know what it's like. It's in your blood too. Am I right?
Yeah, no, it's definitely in my blood. It's something that you probably won't get rid of, even though I wasn't born and bred on a farm, and I'm not a 5th or 6th generation farmer, and don't have the shiny RMs like you, mate. But,
They're only shiny because they've never done a day's work in their life.
but yeah, no, once it's in your blood, I think it's in your blood. And yeah, as a dairy farmer, all my life, like basically all my working life, it was a tough gig, but it was a rewarding gig at the same time.
And so what I really wanted to do, because your speech that you gave, you know, just a rundown of what you'd been through and how hard it got, I think had everybody in tears, and then everybody in the room was really elated, and then everybody was cheering, and there was so much motivation. Can you give us a bit of a rundown of your story for everyone who's listening?
Yeah. Thanks, Shezzy. It's my story actually started in Melbourne. I was born and bred as a city kid. mum and dad were small business owners, and you know, we travelled around a little bit. You know, mum and dad had milk bars, post offices, etc., etc. And I think it wasn't until later on, and when I did this speaker course, when we unpacked our stories, it was an exercise that we had to do, which is I think a very valuable exercise that I think everyone should do at some time, and unpack your story and see, you know, some of the wisdom that you've picked up and some of the value of your story. And I realised then, doing that exercise, that I'd faced a couple of challenges in my life that I knew that I was going through, but didn't really understand or acknowledge them. And one of them was one, connection to community, because I was always a new kid on the block, and I was subjected to a little bit of bullying at school because I was always that new kid on the block. But also, I'd been struggling with, you know, mental health challenges like anxiety and low self-esteem for a very long time, but never knew about it or acknowledged it or understood what was going on. So it wasn't until later on in life, when I faced some challenges as a farmer, that these things started to play out in my life, and you know, which led to what I now call, what I share now, my mental health journey. And it was you know, triggering events like, you know, a flood and a drought that really started exacerbating my spiral and my mental health journey, which led me to some really dark places. And, you know, and that's what I share now, and try and help people that, you know, that I, you know, share my story with, whether it's in a big setting like we were in Bathurst that night, or, you know, in a smaller setting with just a small group of people, trying to empower them to share their stories, and also empower them to seek help if they are struggling.
Why take a story that is personally, I'm sure, very difficult, to talk through, to relive? I know there's some PTSD in your story because of those hardships and those challenges. Then why would someone want to relive that story regularly in front of an audience? That's got to take some courage.
I actually fell into it, mate. Like, it wasn't something, if I had told my 15-year-old self that I'd be now a professional speaker and traveling around Australia and sharing my story in all different communities, I would have laughed. Or, you know, it wasn't something that was in my DNA. It was something well and truly removed from what I'd like to do. I hated even standing up in front of class and doing, you know, reading a reader or anything like that. I was, you know, I'm self-professed. I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed. And, you know, so standing up in front of people was something that I fell into. And it was actually in a journey of actually finding who I was, my purpose and identity in life, because apart from my mental health journey, our farming journey came to an abrupt halt in 2004 in the middle of the millennial drought, and we lost our farm. And it was something, it was a massive challenge to me. And it was something where farming was an all-consuming activity. It was a 24/7. It was just my job, my home. It was where my kids grew up. It was my passion. It was everything. And when we lost our farm, which was from our own undertaking, like, the bank didn't kick us off, we just decided we couldn't farm anymore. As we left the farm, the day that we left, I always say, like, as the furniture van basically drove over the bridge, I unclipped my identity and I hooked it on the front gate of the farm, because that's who I believed I was. So that started a journey then of me trying to find out who I was, even though I'm a husband and a father and, you know, a member of my community and a mate and all that. My whole identity was tied up with being this farmer. And so it started that journey, and one thing led to another, and I found myself doing a speaker course. And I did this speaker course purely out of, you know, self-development, really. It was more about, you know, just developing a skill set, I suppose, to something, just challenging myself. And I never believed it would go anywhere. And then the more that I shared my story, the more impact I had. And when I first started sharing my story, it was more about resilience, persistence, and determination. three key words that I kind of come up with that related to my farming journey. And talking about my mental health wasn't something that was ever on the agenda. It wasn't something that I had the courage to do, and it was not something that I anticipated that that's where this would lead me. But I found the more that I shared of my own personal story and my own personal challenges, the more connection that I had with people, and the more, I suppose, I hate big noting, it sounds like you're big noting, but, impact that you had on people. And so I kept sharing more and more, and then the speaking just took off, because there was so much demand at that stage with the drought, and then following that, the bushfires and et cetera, et cetera. And there was so much demand for just someone to share my story. And I think from all that, my mission developed, and that mission is in three parts. And firstly, it's about creating awareness and education around mental health and wellbeing, particularly in rural communities, because that's where I come from. I come from a small town in northern Victoria, so I understand the impacts that mental health and suicide have in our community and now the wider Australian community. So that's the first bit about creating that awareness and education. The second bit is about inspiring conversations, and I think that's the most important part of my mission, is to inspire conversations. And I do that by sharing my own story, and then hopefully that gives other people permission to then share their stories with me, or with their loved ones, or with their GP or their psychologist, or whoever that is. And then thirdly, it's empowering people to seek help in a safe environment that's free from stigma. And I think if we start talking about this stuff and about mental health, mental illness, suicide in our communities, that breaks down that stigma, I suppose, in the community, makes it easier to talk about. So for me, sharing my story now is a really cathartic experience. It's more, as I jokingly say to a lot of audiences, like I just randomly ask, how much does a psychologist cost per hour? And they say, whatever, say, use a round figure, $100. And I say, well, I've got out of this easy because you've paid me and I've got 100 people in the audience and you're all my psychologists. And I've been able to, because and you know this from hearing my talk, and you would have picked it up pretty, as the media professional that you are, you would have picked up that I was fairly nervous. I'm always anxious before a talk, but when I get up there, my purpose takes over my anxiety, because I know I'm on my mission, and I know that there'll be one person in each room that, that'll hear that story and resonate with it, and hopefully use it to help themselves or help someone that they love.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, I'm always horrendously nervous prior to emceeing. So it's even though I do it for a living, I can still, if I'm emceeing a corporate event, I can feel sick for a week leading up to it, like chronically.
Yeah. But I haven't got that nervous tick that you've got, mate. That's that embarrassing tick.
You need to stop listening to this podcast. Look, we've all got our quirks, mate. We've all got our quirks.
That's it. That's not one of mine.
While you are called the Unbreakable Farmer, and while you talk about your experiences in farming, and I know you do the world of good traveling around to regional communities, because farmers are private people.
Yep.
They're very proud people. They don't showboat, but they also don't talk about their deepest, darkest emotions, and they do go through a lot, and it's a shocking trait of our wonderful fellow regional brothers and sisters. But a lot of your themes, translate away from farming. I know that the things that you have gone through are bigger than farming, and I would imagine that there's people in all kinds of situations and scenarios that can draw and learn from what you have to say. Do you find that?
Yeah, and I think, and that's one of the reasons, and it sounds like I deliberately constructed, and I didn't. It's just basically a chronological timeline of my story. But the way I share my story, there'll be someone in the audience that resonates, whether it's the bullying at school, which had a massive impact on me. Like in year 7, I was a straight A student at school. By the time I was in year 9, I was failing school miserably. And I was, from that first day at high school, I was subjected to, fairly, horrendous verbal bullying, but it ended up being physical. And you've met me, and I'm a little bit like I'm 6'3". I'm not a small fella, so to be picked on and I was as big as what I am now then, to be picked on, it was a big thing. But I never reached out and sought help. So by sharing that part of my story, hopefully there'll be kids in the audience or someone that's still holding that inside them that'll share that part of their story. Not having a connection to a community, or whether it's losing. And it's one thing that I've really challenged myself. Like, I've stood in front of audiences 3 weeks after the Black Summer bushfires, 150 people in a room where they've lost everything. And I'm standing up there thinking, what are they going to get out of my pissy little story, But I realise now, the more I think about it, is that I lost everything when we walked away from our farm. We'd worked for 20 years of our life to build something, and it was all gone. So it's no different to your house getting burnt down, just a different circumstance. So I think I understand now that, loss is loss and grief is grief, and all that. And it doesn't matter how big or small. A big lesson that I learnt in that Black Summer bushfires at a community event that I went to down in Gippsland. It was the community coming together to share their stories with a service provider that was trying to support this community. And the most distraught person in the room after they went around was a lady that lost 3 rose bushes in her garden. She had a young baby in a pram, and she was just totally broken. Yet the 15 people that had shared their story beforehand had all lost their houses and their sheds and the whole thing. But she was struggling so much with survivor guilt that it made me understand it doesn't matter how big or small your loss or your grief is, it's how it affects you and how you deal with it. And my story is about not dealing with what I was going through really well. I didn't talk to people. I isolated myself. I, fell into a spiral that I couldn't get out of. And that's, I think, one of the purposes of my talks now, is to try and help people that feel themselves starting to spiral out of control, how they can grab onto the edges and climb back out and try and seek the help that they need.
We first came across you during the 2018 drought, I think. Well, we first connected online, when we were doing some stuff with Rural Aid, and that we were living here in Bathurst on a farm, and we had no water at that time. Now, we're not dependent on our farm. We have, we call it a hobby farm, I guess.
Yeah, we had other forms of income, that wasn't, purely the farm.
But we had no water at that time. Our tanks were so dry. So we would have to, shower every 3 days. You don't realise how vital water is and how much we take it for granted, I guess. And during that time, we did a lot of trips around to different farming areas. We did deliveries of hay and food, and just in our local community we saw so much devastation, and it makes me get all choked up when I think about it, because you could see these people, they were so desperate and so hurting, but they weren't good at talking about it, at all. In fact, they felt extremely uncomfortable when we would turn up with supplies and just wanting to help, because
they were embarrassed almost.
They were embarrassed, and they always, didn't they? They'd always say, that we're not as worse off as
someone else.
Yeah, as Joe blogs. And that's such an Australian way. And you made a lot of impact during, that time. And I wanted to say thank you, because I know that you helped a lot of people. You're a real sweet, salt of the earth type person who you genuinely enjoy listening to people's stories, and what you did during that time for people that I know as well, just in sharing your story, really helped them to open up a lot. And
I'm sure saved lives.
And saved, many lives. You have come through an awful lot to be here today, and I love it how you say that you're on a mission and you've got a purpose, and you know.
It's like the Blues Brothers. You're on a mission from God.
Yeah.
Just
But I know that it must be taxing for you sometimes when you see these hard, like, because I was wiped out for ages after seeing, you know, these people who had lost everything, and it's a
You're very an empathetic person, and we kind of got to a point where we had to say maybe no more for you for a little while. Shares helping out because it was weighing very heavily on, you know.
I just felt so sorry for them, and I felt like I couldn't help them. Whereas you have this pragmatic approach, which I just find really admirable, and I don't know where I'm going with this, but I just wanted to say thank you.
That was lovely.
No,
Thanks.
but it's the same. I feel, you know, I've probably self-diagnosed myself as an empath as well. It's really hard. I can't let go of, you know, things. Like I've still got connections with communities that I would have spoke in during the drought, like where I'll, you know, they might message me every now and again, or I'll message them just to see how they're going. But, you know, it's interesting how you say about, you know, and this is not being disrespectful for people that live in the cities and the towns, but something as simple as what you were talking about, Shazzy, about having a shower. I can remember being in southern Queensland and doing a school talk, and I noticed, like, because, and I think I might have explained this that night in Bathurst, that I call it the Michael Hutchins syndrome. I'm an INXS fan, and the way it helps me, like, because so Michael was as blind as a bat apparently, and, you know, even if he was playing at Wembley Stadium, he could only see the first 7 rows of the audience. So it didn't matter if there was 100,000 people in the room, it was an intimate concert to the first 7 rows. Well, I do that to help with my anxiety when I talk, and, you know, I try and look around the room and see someone that's resonating with my story. This is giving away all the tips of
No, I'm listening. I'm learning.
my tips. And I'll try and pick 4 people out in the audience, and hopefully they're in different spots of the room who are resonating with my story. And then it looks like I'm a shit-hot speaker because I'm going from side to the side of the room, going across. But by doing that, I'm really only having 4 individual conversations with 4 people that are resonating really, you know, with my story. And it just helps me, you know, in that room in Bathurst that night. It was a big room, and you know, it becomes overwhelming sometimes because all of a sudden self-doubt comes in, and like especially when I spotted you in the audience, Grant, and I'm saying, well, shit, I wonder if I'm, you know, I wonder what he's thinking, you know, that internal conversation starts in your head, and you go, you know, he's just a normal bloke, all right, get over it just a minute, and then all of a sudden it starts again. So I do that. Well, this time at this school, I noticed there was a young girl at the back of the room, and I could tell she was resonating, and she was uncomfortable. She was moving around, and at the end of the talk, I noticed she was at the back of the room, and her teacher was kind of, you know, arm around her, and then I heard her teacher say, no, go up and speak to him. And anyway, she came up and talked to me, and we sat down and we had a chat. And it was amazing, just the little things that affected this. She was a 15-year-old girl, and she was in year 10, and that was the last year at that school. She then had to go to boarding school because her school didn't go any further. Anyway, we had a chat, and that morning, like, she'd got up and helped her dad drag 2 cows, and ultimately had to shoot them, drag them out of the dam. And I'm thinking, wow, you know, that's pretty heavy for a young girl. But that wasn't what was affecting her. That's just part and parcel of being a farm girl. And then she was talking about a number of other things, you know, coming to school and thinking that the town kids didn't understand what they were going through on the farm, you know, that disconnection between rural and city. And then the 2 things that were affecting her the most were, and Shazzy, you'll relate to this, is that she could only have a couple of showers a week, and she was a 15-year-old girl. They only had enough water that, you know, maybe 1 or 2 showers a week, and that's all she could have. So that was really weighing heavily on her. But the other thing that she was taking on is because she had to leave school and move to boarding school the next year, she was really concerned about the financial pressure she was putting her parents under because she had to go to school. And it was just amazing, that conversation, for her to get that out and probably talk about it. And so that's when, you know, I talk about, you know, starting these conversations. We've got to be empathetic. You don't generally necessarily have to be going through the same thing as as the person, but being able to have the ability to put yourself in their shoes and be able to be non-judgmental as well in those conversations. And, you can't judge anyone for their, I am an avid listener of your podcast, and I've heard your story,
God.
Grant, and for anyone to judge what you've been through after your accident and stuff like that, well, that's no one else's business. They don't, to judge you on that, they've got no idea because they're not walking the same journey as you. They're just putting their perception and how they think it was for you, and then their ideals and all that sort of stuff. But you can't judge anyone, so you got to be empathetic and non-judgmental. And I think one of the things that the best tool that we can have in our toolbox, our mental health toolbox, is that skill of listening and just being able to listen and support. Generally don't have to say anything. And one of the things that stops the conversations from happening is because everyone thinks you've got to have advice and you've got to, have answers to all these questions. Most of these questions or most of these things that we talk about are all bigger than us, but you were just having that empathetic approach is what we need to do to be able to comfort and support somebody.
So true. But you are a very authentic person, and I think that shines through. And obviously people hear you speak, they hear you talk about how difficult it got for you, and how you kind of battled your way out of, a really dark place. And I think that people respect that. Because that, in you being that honest and being as authentic as you are, that is a real gift for people, and it allows them they feel comfortable in being able to say, well, me too, when sometimes they're quite scared to do that. So
yeah, and often the first phase of healing or working through it or progressing through your problems is admitting that you've got one. You know what I mean? And that's often the hardest hurdle.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it is. And it's once you can start those conversations and you as you say, you've jumped the biggest hurdle, and it's just, there'll be hurdles obviously to still jump. But once you've got it out there and people know, especially with mental health is silent, because no one really knows. Everyone you pass in the streets traveling a journey we know nothing about, and you don't know. And it's like when you see the news and you see something dreadful happen, or someone's done something dreadful, and one of the first thoughts that always come into my head is what's gone wrong in their life. What's gone wrong in their life that this has happened and this is all played out. What's, obviously, there's ramifications for what's played out for them, but something's gone wrong, and how haven't they been supported at some stage, or, and that's always the first thought in my head. And I don't know if that's just the way I'm wired or whatever, but trying to be authentic is something that I've really tried hard. Well, I don't really have to try hard, but it's something that I'm really conscious about. I'm lucky I've got a good support network with my wife and my 5 kids around me that keep my feet on the ground pretty well.
5?
So
Did you say 5?
Yeah.
Jesus Christ, we just did a 12-hour drive from Queensland to Bathurst yesterday with 3. So I can't imagine what your road trips would be like.
Yeah, so it was. They were the old Tarago. It was pretty hectic. The old space shuttle. But
you've got to have a good support network. You do.
Yeah, but to keep you grounded, it's is good. No use getting ahead of yourself. And I think COVID taught us that. Things were starting to really snowball for me as a speaker prior to COVID, and it all got taken away just like that in 48 hours. And
how did you cope with that? Because I'm just picturing you, you're going really well as a speaker. You've gone through the 2018, 2019, well, did it start in 2017? I don't know, the drought, which was a huge thing. Then you had bushfires. Then, you get hit with COVID and you can't go anywhere. Did you find some of that, old self-talk coming back, and
you're like losing your identity twice?
Yeah, and it was like that. I was actually the day March 13th, I think it was, that year, when COVID kind of was become real in Australia. I was in Hewington in central Queensland, and I'd landed in Hewington, and within 10 minutes of landing, the phone had rang, and I was meant to be in Tamworth 2 days later. And the CEO of the Tamworth Business Chamber rang up and said, there's this thing called COVID, and it looks like we don't know what it's all about, but we're going to have to cancel our event. And then basically all the events for the next 9 months were all just wiped off my calendar. And I got home and I thought, this will last a week or so it'll be okay. And I just sat on the couch and did a few emails here and there, and then thought, I'll better start doing a bit of social media to make sure, putting some good messages out there, and then realised that, this isn't going away. So I leaned back on agriculture. I went back to farming and driving tractors, doing online stuff and that in between, but had to do something to put food on the table because I was basically again. And that did, I'll be totally honest with you, it took a massive hit again on my well-being. Not only that, we had, our kids are all grown up. So our eldest son's a professional musician. Our daughter's a nurse. They both live in Melbourne. They were in the middle of, some fairly stringent lockdowns, and that was having a toll on us because we couldn't go and see them. It was, all by Zoom or FaceTiming, and it was, we're a close family, and that was taking a toll on us. Even in town, in our rural town, we had to have a bubble and all that sort of stuff. So it was really tough. Plus, I wasn't doing what I'd set out to do again, and I'd lost my identity, and it did take a toll. And I did fall back into some of my old ways, and my self-talk was not real good, and ended up having to visit the doctor again, and make sure that, I was looking after myself, because it did take a toll, because, I'd invested a fair bit, or I'd stepped way outside my comfort zone and invested a fair bit into becoming a speaker, not money wise, but just, soul wise. And then all of a sudden it's gone again. And I'm thinking, well, what the, what am I meant to do here? And you've heard, I think I talked about, that word failure when I was talking in Bathurst, and, all of a sudden I'm thinking, shit, I've failed again, but it's outside my control. I had no control over it. And it's a bit like I talk about my silent business partner, who was Mother Nature in farming. Like, I had no control over her, and I was starting to waste a lot of energy on trying to control something I had no control over. So I, just had to relax back into farming and just ride it out. And I'm glad I did. I'm glad I kept being persistent in trying to get my message out there, because, we're coming out of it now, and I'm finding myself really busy as a speaker again. I've just come back from a week in Western Australia. I'm off to South Australia on the weekend. I'm starting to travel around again, which is really good, and get to go into those communities where I love connecting with people and hearing their stories, whether they're good or they're bad, or and just being part of their community, and hopefully in some small way having an impact.
Oh, I've seen the impact. I've seen it firsthand. It's incredible. I still, when we went around and we visited some of the farms, just around our area, I was really shocked by the substandard way that some of our farmers were living in trying to protect their stock and their animals.
The sacrifices they were making on their own standard of living to try and keep their animals alive.
So, and I'm talking 20 minutes from my house. We went to a farm and they had no clean clothes because they had no water, and they couldn't afford to get any water, so they didn't wash anything. They were eating a can of baked beans over a week, and some beef that they'd killed or something. All the money was going into trying and feeding, their stock. And remember, they had their clothes were ripped, and they had
and you could
safety
say,
pins.
well, why don't you sell the stock, right? But there was no price for the stock.
No.
And not only that, if they get rid of that stock, then they have no
nothing.
livelihood because they can't afford to restock. So they were desperate to hang on to every single animal, and to the point where even Remember, some of them were having to put their own dogs down.
I was about to say that. Yeah, it was absolutely eye-opening for me.
And I've lived as a farmer, I've lived through a drought, and some of the stuff I've seen in South Australia, New South Wales, and southern Queensland during the drought, they were just like, it was like you were being teleported onto a different planet. And it's a bit like the same with the bushfires and some of the areas where I've worked in after the floods as well. It's the same thing, and the same thing, just different disasters. Like, still going to communities now, and we're 3 years after the bushfires, and people are still living in temporary accommodation that they've cobbled together on their farms or on their land because they can't build a house or they can't get their insurance or all these things. I think it's a bit of a blight on our country that we've got people, and look, and that's not even going into our First Nations people either, but that we've got people living in our country that are going through that. It's just we're always quick to give aid to other countries, and feel the emotional heartstrings get pulled when we see what happens there. But a lot of what happens in our country is just kind of gets pushed to the background because, well, especially in the last few years, we had the drought. We moved straight into bushfires, straight into COVID, then straight into floods. So really everything just gets kind of pushed to the side because the next disaster is already on top of us, kind of thing. And there's a lot of communities out there that are a long way from being healed and a long way to go before they've recovered. And it's a real eye opener when you go into those communities and see how some people are living. And then one, it makes you feel blessed that we're not the most well-off family in the world, but we're not living from can of baked beans to can of baked beans kind of thing. So it's
crazy. Do you think you might run for Parliament and be like a voice for the people?
No.
I've had some good friends that have gone into politics with all the good intentions, but once you get swallowed up by the machine, you get swallowed up by the machine. And
you can't really make a difference. The machine, the system's broken, and you're right. Even the best, most credentialed, intelligent, and active person can still just run up against politics.
That's right, and politics rules. So but I am using my voice more and more. I've become confident in my voice as an advocate for rural communities, though. So I am using that a bit more, especially recently in the media, and that, asking that, funding be directed to the right places, especially for, not to, and this is no disrespect to the big organisations, but not to the big organisations, but to the grassroots stuff that's going to have an actual effect in a community. Instead of, I've just actually come from a meeting where I just talked to a group of guys who are setting up a foundation in a small country town to try and combat the mental health and youth suicide in that town at the moment, to try and do some good, but in their town. Not trying to bite off any more than that they can chew, but just basically focusing on their town and trying to make a difference there, and then try and model that as they go out. But it's just focusing on their town. But if funding and that got directed to the right areas, we might be able to make a bit more of an impact at that grassroots level, which is
really, really important. Do you think that we are winning this battle against suicide in our regional communities, like in what you've seen?
Some days I think we are, and then you get a phone call or a message to say that someone suicided or took their own life in a community, and then you go, well, maybe we're not. And the thing is, it's a suicide. And I never talk about statistics because, if we said there's 3,500 people a year in Australia die from suicide, that's just a statistic. But until you see that one person in that one community and the impact that has, and the ripple effect that has through the whole community and through their friends and their family, they're more than statistics. And so it's it's one person at a time kind of thing. But I think the awareness around mental illness and that in communities is good. The access to services in communities isn't.
No.
So even if you do identify and you start those conversations, where do you go? Or can you hang on 6 weeks to get a psychologist appointment?
Oh, that blows my mind that that's still. I spoke to somebody the other day at the post office, and they were saying that their daughter was really suicidal and was begging for help, and they said you'll have to come back in 4.5 weeks for the critical appointment.
And you go, well, if it's critical is 4.5 weeks, like why isn't it the next 48 hours?
Well, they said take her up to the hospital.
Yeah, and every town, every rural community is under the pump at the moment. Like we've got which is the biggest town to us, close to us, and I think there was 15 doctors at one surgery, and there's 5 there now because there's shortage of doctors, and then that's them putting the ED departments under pressure, and it just starts to snowball. So unfortunately, the system's broken. How we fix it, that's a bigger problem than I'll ever have the brain power to be able to work out. But I think if we can. My big thing is, and I just knowing who your 5 are, who are those 5 people in your life that, that you love and you trust. And if shit hits the fan, you can talk to. Knowing those people so that you've got at least an immediate support network around you, and then try and work the rest out. Try and navigate that mental health or even just normal physical health, that system to be able to get the support that you need is the next step. But the support is out there. It's just knowing how to tap into it. And I'm lucky that I've got a bit of a support network behind me. That if someone comes to me that because I'm just me, I'm just an ex-dairy farmer. I'm not a social worker or a counsellor or a psychologist. But if someone needs help, I've got some people that kind of stand behind me that I can get on the phone and say, listen, can you just at least talk to this person until we can get them into the doctors or whatever. But yeah, that's a huge problem, and I don't really know how we're going to sort that one out. But just keeping the awareness in their community and keep people talking. That's don't let people isolate is the first step to try and combat what's going on.
That's
hey Warren, just off the back, sorry, Shez, off the back of what Shezzy said, it's so refreshing to see, in particular, a male farmer, come out and speak about mental health and illness and issues and dealing with it. Do you feel like in regional areas and, when it comes to farming, it's probably not enough people like yourself speaking openly about it? Do you feel like you're a small community of people who are willing to be open about it, or do you feel like it is getting the conversation is getting bigger and bigger in the regional communities?
Yeah, I think it's getting bigger, but the recent farmer wellbeing report that come out said like 45% of farmers that were interviewed or that submitted into that wellbeing report have considered self-harm or suicide.
You said 45%.
Yeah, it's just ridiculous. And 30% of those that were in that report as well have attempted. Like it's just mind blowing. And then also the statistic, then the increase the increase of mental illness or of feeling depressed or anxious in the women in the rural or in the farming communities had also increased. So they were massive, so not that I suppose they weren't a massive shock to me because they're the conversations that I have with people, but they were pretty daunting statistics. And, I think a lot more work needs to be done in that rural community, which, one of the things that I'm really aiming for, for the remainder of this year to get to as many communities as I can. Not that I'm going to make that huge a difference, but at least inspire those conversations so people continue that conversation because, and I think the statistic was like 61% of the people that were in that survey also felt isolated from their community. So that also is a statistic that we need to make sure that people are able to feel that they're not isolated and they've got somewhere to turn. And, if we all start creating those, understanding who your 5 people are and start creating these networks, eventually they'll all start to intersect, because you, Grant, will know someone in this circle, and Shezzy, you'll know someone in this, and George, you'll know someone in this circle. And all of a sudden they're all intersecting. And that's how I believe we'll build resilient communities.
It's so true, true. I was just trying to think who my 5 are. Could you think who your 5 are?
No, I don't have. I think I've got 5. I probably do. No, of course I do. When you add family, yeah. But outside the family, no, I don't think I do.
Well,
but it's very surprising when you sit down. It's an exercise you can actually do. Sit down, think who the 5 are, write their phone numbers down, and would you ring them then and say, "Listen,
that's right.
Warren's just done this, told me to do this exercise, so I've acknowledged that you're part of my support network. Would if shit hits the fan, I'm going to call you." If you can't ring that number, well, are they really part of your support network? That's the thing. Like, it's those tough conversations that you got to have with people, and you'll be surprised sometimes when you sit down and do that exercise who the 5 are. It can be surprising.
Yeah, they might be different to who you think. I'd be on there 5 times for you.
No, you'd be number 6.
Oh, what? Warren, we had 6 mice last night. You are man of the people out there in the communities. Are we facing another mice plague? We are concerned here.
We came home from our holidays. We literally had 6 on us on our bed in our bedroom last night, and 8 by the morning.
Yep.
Are we in trouble?
You might be. Or you might.
Shit, that's not what we want to hear.
It's probably on the cards. I suppose we've had the fires, the floods. Now we just need the locusts and all that to come.
Oh my God!
Jeez, I really wish we didn't build this house out of cheese. In hindsight, it's a really dumb idea.
I feel like we're going through all the plagues in the Bible. Like,
it's very biblical.
That's what I said. No, and all we need is someone to be able to part the waters, but we might have to leave that up to George.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Yeah, exactly. I did play Jesus. You're almost like the modern day Jesus. Hey, just lastly, Warren, one from me, a big theme on this podcast, I think is identity. Outside of what we do as a job, who are we? And you mentioned that, when you left that first farm and you sort of, clipped your identity onto the gate there, are there any basic steps to anybody at any age figuring out who they are?
Yeah, and that's it was a big journey for me, and it's still an ongoing journey. And when I stand in front of an audience or, talk to guys like yourselves, it's still part of that journey of finding out who I was. But I think that the thing is you got to realize that you're more than a job, and you're more than, you're standing in the community. You are a person, and you just got to, I think, dig deep. And one of the things that I do now is it would have been easy for me at the start of COVID to say, oh, well, I gave the speaking a go. It's too tough now. There's not enough security. But what do I do? And but I chose to keep pushing through it. So, because I believe that's who I am now. So I think it's just about, believing in who you are and just keep pursuing that until, you come out the other end.
I remember when I first had our daughter Sailor, and I had left work and I became a stay-at-home mum. And we went to an event and someone said to me, "Oh, what do you do?" Because it's always kind of the first question that people want to ask you.
Yeah.
And so I remember saying, I don't do anything. I'm a mum. And I remember feeling how, I felt really lost. That feeling of loss of identity, because once upon a time I was, I'm a TV producer, or I'm a journalist, or I'm a blah, blah, blah. And
she was 3-time Miss Mount Panorama as well. Let's not forget that. Oh.
That's right. That was a bit of a mouthful, but I didn't really ever say that. But
that was sexy as shit is what that was.
But it's so true. I remember feeling like you're being judged. The first question that people say to you when they're meeting you is, "Hi, what's your name? What do you do?" And I think that has a big part to play in our global identity issues, because you do feel that your job or what you do every day is the whole sum of you.
Yeah, well, and just to add to that is we had it at the weekend, and like this is a quiet television. This is a quiet time in television. Free to air television isn't going as well as it was, and I don't have a lot of work on at the moment either. And it's hard to say. When are you still making television? And well, not at the moment, no. And that's almost embarrassing to say and a little bit humiliating, because I have hung my hat on my career my entire life. The entirety of my identity is made up of the television Grant Denyer, because I've just devoted my life to it, right? So finding who you are away from that is a very difficult, uncomfortable, and tough thing to navigate, because your pride is so tied up in your career and your achievements and the title. And I've had to work very hard on trying to figure out, who I am, and that's still a work in progress for me. But that's the same for anyone who's lost their job, anyone who's switched careers, anyone who's had an unfortunate break where maybe that industry is now no longer as strong as it was. These are tough real world things that we all go through, even if it looks great from the outside. That maybe you won a gold Logie once. I'm trying to figure out who I am away from television, and that is a tough road to walk.
And I don't ask people anymore, what do you do? I just don't. I say, hi, how are you? My name's blah, blah, blah. How are you going? What's been happening lately?
And I think that's one of the legacies of your podcast. As I said, I've listened to most of the episodes, and like for people outside of the podcast world that don't listen to this, just would see you, Grant, as Grant or Shezzy on the front of the magazines and all that sort of stuff, but you're just real people, and that's your real identity. It's not the TV host or the producer or whatever. It's you're actually real people. Your mums and dads. You're part of your community. You like having a good time. You like having family time. All that sort of stuff. You're just normal people. And I think that's where we've all got it. We get all hooked up, and that's where I said, I'm lucky having my support network that keep me grounded, because they don't let you get ahead of yourself. And a lot of people all of a sudden do get ahead of themselves. And, you meet if you meet a true champion sports person, they're the best ones, because a true champion sportsman I'm a football fan, is a champion person as well. It's the ones that are fringe champions that get a bit ahead of themselves and can't give you the time of day, or, it's so true. Just being real and authentic is who you are, and that's who you've got to try and aspire to be. And, that's... And
little changes. If anybody asks me now, what do you do? I'm going to say I'm just a really good person.
Sex machine.
No, not a sex machine, thank you. No. I'm just a really good person.
Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah, and then I'll wait for the... then I'll give them a lecture and hand them one of Warren's cards. So, Warren, how can people find you? Give yourself a really big plug so that, every 1,000 million listeners that we've got or that we will have can find you.
Yep.
Go on. You go. I was just going to say, I just realised we have about 2 listeners to every episode, and I realised that one of them is now just Warren. So this podcast doesn't reach as far as I thought after his confession that he's listened to every episode.
Warren in the trees. Warren in the trees are our listeners.
Yes, that's
great background.
No, well, I'm halfway home from a meeting, and I've got magpies sitting behind me too somewhere, so it's very interesting. But yeah, my website's www.theunbreakablefarmer.com.au, but I'm all over socials as well, so you'll find me somewhere. And look, even if it's just for a chat, just reach out. I'm always happy to chat and direct you in the right way to go and seek some help if that's what you need, or if you just need to talk, I'm a good listener. So yeah, give us a yell out.
Good work, mate. Well, keep up the wonderful work that you've been doing. It's been a pleasure to meet you and have this discussion with you. We really appreciate the wonderful work that you continue to do. A big hello to the person who drove the car through the park in behind you as well. It was great seeing you in the episode. Weird that someone was driving a vehicle through a park.
What?
Did
I
you
didn't
not see
see that.
Hello to the magpies too.
They just went past and they just drove past before I seen that. But I didn't know if it come up in the camera, but that's all good.
I did not see that.
You obviously just, you were...
I was looking into your eyes.
falling
But
deep.
don't you look back at every time I see George, I'm waiting for it because I still can't get over the guy that hypnotized George in that episode. I still,
Oh my God. It's such a good
I still
episode.
keep looking at his face, waiting for him to go. Yeah, Lord, what is it? The
Phantom of the Shitter.
Phantom of the Shitter or Pirates of Shit Pants or whatever.
Oh my God.
Yeah, have you got the real me? No, you absolutely do. And it's been a real pleasure meeting you, mate. It's amazing the work you do.
Yeah,
Thank you.
it really is.
Thanks for having me on. It's a real privilege. So keep up the good work, guys. So thanks for having me.
See you, mate. All the best,
See
Warren.
ya.
See ya. Bye.
Talk to you
Bye.
down the track.
Yeah, bye.
Oh my God, I can't believe I didn't see the bloody car going through.
Yeah.
I think I was looking at you, just like...
No, you were just really enjoying and deep, in the chat.
I got a little bit teary, but I'm okay with, holding it together. Not that we need to, but he's a real stand-up guy. He's
good dude, isn't he? It's
Yeah.
very easy for people, who live in the cities to not understand the plight of the farmers. And a lot of them are like, well, God, the farmers, they're always whinging. It's either there's got too much rain or not enough rain. Why don't they just choose something else? And then mate, who's gonna make the wheat for your Wheat Bix
And a lot of them
and your
is-
pasta? Who's gonna grow the cotton for the shirt you're wearing? Who's gonna do that? Who's gonna be there to put food on your bloody table when you go to the supermarket? The supermarket doesn't make it. The farmers make it, and it's sent to the supermarket for you to buy to feed your family with. And, mate, it is the least profitable game in the world. They take the most amount of risk. They might put $1 million in the ground in the hope that a crop might grow so you can eat, and then the rain might not come. And then that's $1 million that they lose just in the hope that maybe that they can provide you with food to eat.
And the sad thing is that a lot of them are so far in debt, and I didn't know this until we did all that work with Rural Aid. A lot of them are so far in debt, unless they take their lives, their families will be left in debt. The only way that they feel, a lot of these farmers, that they can pay off this enormous debt that has been collated over the years is to be paid out their life insurance. And I heard that a handful of times.
And no one should get to that point.
No.
No one should get to the point where the only way to save my family is to end, my own
it's
life. There has to be
absolutely
other
heartbreaking.
means available.
But it's people like Warren who are actually out there, who are going around and physically visiting communities, and he travels all the time.
Yeah, he works
That's
hard.
the only way that these conversations happen, because we know farmers who don't have TV, they don't listen to radio, they're just out there working every day, they come home and they go back and do it again the next day. And so how do you check in on them,
Next time you're taking a sip of milk, mate, you put milk in your coffee. Just think about the family that has to get up at 3 a.m. every morning to milk those cows, and they get paid less for the milk than it costs them to produce it. It's just, the whole thing is so shit.
It is so shit.
And it's not their fault.
It's not. And I have so much respect for farmers and farming communities and also for people like Warren, because,
because people also look at them and go, oh, they're so rich because they got all this land. Because if you're in Sydney, you would go, oh, well, if you got that much land, you're so wealthy. But they're not. They're living on a plot of land. They're 10 years in debt. And it's getting worse, and there's no way out. So they don't have any cash. They might have a plot of land, but they've got so much debt. So it's just viewed wrong, and not from a place of It's only from just not knowing any better.
Yeah, that's right, because nobody is telling the stories of these guys. So,
Anyway,
yeah.
good chat.
Thank you, Warren. Thank you, the Unbreakable Farmer. We love farmers.
We
do
do,
love
and we
farmers.
apologise if we didn't let you in as much as we normally do there, George. For whatever reason, we couldn't see you on our little setup
That's
here
because
today.
I've stuffed up.
Shezzy's little
the camera thing.
little hot fingers have done something
Yeah,
different.
no, look, that first sort of 20 minutes of the interview, I did leave and then came in right at the very
we
end.
wouldn't have known. We wouldn't have known. In fact, you could probably do that every episode if you really want to.
Is that okay? Yeah, like the
No.
last 5 minutes, I'll come in and just ask about
No.
3 questions and then wrap up the podcast.
Sorry, brother.
No, it was a very fascinating chat. Warren is super supportive on the socials too. He's always reaching out and commenting and just being supportive, you know.
We
So
nearly-
it translates in every part of him, hey?
We nearly passed out the night that we met him because it had been a long time coming, and he recited several different podcast episodes and had a good giggle about certain things.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but I forget people listen.
I was-
I forget that when we are telling stories
I
that we
was-
probably shouldn't.
Horrified because Grant had told some stories about me that he thought was hilarious, and it was not hilarious, but
Yep. Funny.
The people love it though. The people really lap it up and enjoy every second of it.
the people do love it. The people love those kinds of
So
stories.
join us next week for Mouse Watch 2023 to find out, did anyone die? Has Scout been carried out by an army of mice from her own bedroom?
We
As
need
the
to get a
tales
cat.
of woe continue.
Can we interview a mouse, Mr. Squeak?
There's 8 in the bin. Do you want me to get a couple of them out?
No, we've taken the bin out. It's not still there.
Oh, God. She says lying. Thanks,
All right.
Bruddy.
Thanks,
Appreciate it.
everyone.
Love you guys. Good to see you.
We
Can't
love
wait for
you.
next week.
Okay, bye.
It's All True, the podcast with Grant and Shezzy Denya.
Bye bye.